Hey y'all, it's me, Kevvie. Happy Pride! You may recall earlier this year I read the Transvestite Memoirs by the Abbé de Choisy, and I talked about how in the back of this book there is a beautiful fairy tale written by Charles Perrault, the same guy who did Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Snow White, and all those other fairy tales. And I decided for Pride Month this year I was going to read that to y'all. So here's the story of the Marquise-Marquis de Banneville. Since women are dabbling in writing and pride themselves on their fine wit, I do not wish to be the last of them to mark on my zeal for my sex. But let it not be laid to my account that we are thought to be great personages in spite of all the little ways which we do not know how to shed. In fact, though we may be most proper in our works, it is there that you see woman in 1,000 aspects, lofty sentiments, whether extravagant, strained, or sublime, can never hide from the discerning reader's eye a certain softness, a certain weakness which is natural to us, and on which we always fall back. So we must not be given more worth than we have. To believe that a pretty young girl, brought up in the boudoir, is capable of writing like M. Pellison is gross error. She will, however, have the burning warmth of her age, new turns of phrase, lively expressions, a delightful imagination. She will perhaps be more pleasing than Monsieur de but for exactness, substance, and texture, she looks to Monsieur de That's just ... claiming only to amuse herself first in amusing her companions by her little stories. Here then is my coup d'essai. You will be the judge, mademoiselle, because it is you to whom I appeal. But if you are over 20, I forbid you to read me. Whoops. Look for something more substantial. A girl of 20 years must think of making herself a good housekeeper, and she is well past the time for trifles. Moreover, do not begin to doubt what I am going to tell you. I saw it all, I knew it all, heard it all. I was an eyewitness to this, and no circumstance was unnoticed by me. Some aspects will appear singular enough to you. That is exactly what gave me the wish to put them on paper. I have never thought highly of those who deal only in commonplaces. Well-worn roads are for the little talents, and whoever puts himself to the trouble of writing must choose a theme which stands up on its own and which, without affectation, eloquence, or fancies, draws everyone's attention from the beginning. Now on with the dance! The Marquis de Banneville had not been married 6 months to a beautiful, intelligent young heiress when he was killed in the Battle of St. Denis. His widow was deeply affected. They had been still in their first ardors of love, and no quarrel had clouded their happiness. She did not give way to weeping and wailing, however, and without the usual public lamentations, she retired to one of her country houses to shed tears as she wished, without restraint and without ostentation. But she had hardly arrived there when she was made to recognize by certain signs that she was carrying a child. At first, the joy of seeing a little replica of the one whom she had so much loved completely possessed her. She wanted to preserve the precious remains of her dear husband and neglected nothing which would help to keep his memory fresh. Her pregnancy was quite untroubled, but when her time drew near, 1,000 thoughts came to torment her. The mortal death of a man in battle came to her eyes with horrid vividness. She imagined the same fate for the child she was expecting, and being unable to bear such a sad and mournful fancy, she prayed 1,000 times that heaven would give her a girl who would be protected from such a cruel fate by her sex. She did more than that. She took it into her head to correct nature if nature did not respond to her wishes. To that end, she made all necessary preparations and made her midwife swear that she would clearly announce the birth of a girl, even if the baby should be a boy. The matter was easily carried through as proposed. Money can achieve everything. The Marquise was mistress in her chateau, and the news was soon spread that she had been delivered of a girl, although in fact it was a boy. The child was taken to the curé, who in all good faith baptized it in the name of Marianne. The wet nurse was also won over. Little Marianne was reared by this wet nurse, who in due course became her governess. She was taught all that a young lady of quality should know: dancing, music, the harpsichord. Her masters had only to speak, and in a moment she would grasp all they had been explaining to her. Such a great facility for learning obliged her mother to have her taught languages, history, and even the new philosophy, without fear that so many sciences would intermingle in confusion in a head where everything was arranged in an unbelievably orderly manner. What was so ravishingly wonderful was that such a fine intelligence seemed to rest in the body of an angel. When 12 years old, her figure was already formed. It is true that since childhood she had been somewhat constrained by an iron bodice to bring out her hips, heighten her bosom, all with success, and her face, which I shall describe to you only when she first travels to Paris, was already a perfect beauty. She lived in a wonderful innocence and had no suspicion that she could be anything but a girl. In their province, she was called La Belle Marianne. All the neighboring petty nobility, who looked on her as a great heiress, came to pay court to her. She listened to them all and responded to their gallantries with much freedom of spirit. "My heart is not for provincials," she said one evening to her mother, "and if I welcome them, it is because I want to be pleasing to everyone." "Take care, my child," said the Marquise to her. "You are talking like a coquette." "Ah, maman, let them be," she replied. "If they love me as much as they wish, what is it to you, provided that I do not love them?" The Marquise was greatly delighted to hear her speak so, and gave her complete freedom with these young men who, for their part, never strayed from the path of respect. She knew the truth of the matter, and hence remained unconcerned. La Belle Marianne studied until noon, and in the afternoon prepared herself for the evening. "After giving the whole of the morning to my mind," she would say in her agreeable way, "it is only fair to give the afternoon to my eyes, mouth, and to my entire little person." And assuredly, she did not begin to dress until 4 in the afternoon. Usually, the company had assembled then, and took pleasure in seeing her at her toilet. Her chambermaids arranged her hair, but she herself always added some small improvement to her coiffure. Her fair hair dropped on her shoulders in large ringlets. The sparkle of her eyes and her high color were dazzling, and this great loveliness was sustained and animated by 1,000 pretty phrases which issued at every moment from the most beautiful lips that ever were. Such young men as she had around her were in a state of adoration, and she neglected nothing to excite them evermore. She herself, with a fine grace, attached pendants to her ears of pearls, rubies, or diamonds. She affixed patches, some almost imperceptible, which were so tiny that one would have to have a complexion as delicate and fine as hers for them to be perceived. But in putting them on, she went to great fuss and trouble, pondering whether one or the other would best become her. Her mother was full of delight, and at every moment congratulated herself on her skill. "He is 12 years old," she murmured to herself. "I would soon have had to think of sending him to the military academy, and in 2 years he would have been following his poor father." And with that, transported with affection, she went to kiss her dear daughter, and allowed her to perform the little coquetries which she would have condemned in someone else's daughter. That is how matters stood when the Marquise de Banneville was obliged to go to Paris to petition in an action at law which one of her neighbors had brought against her. She did not omit to take her daughter, and later recognized that a pretty young girl is not without her uses in the case of petitions. She first went to see the Comtesse d'Alitreff, an old friend, and asked her counsel and protection for her daughter. The Comtesse was struck with Marianne's beauty and kissed her with so much delight that she returned to it several times. She undertook to look after her while her mother was occupied with her case, and promised she would not lack amusements. Marianne could not have fallen into better hands. The Comtesse, who was born for gaiety, had found a means of separating herself from an inconvenient husband. Not that he was an unworthy man, liking pleasure as much as did she, but as they did not agree on their choice of pleasures, they had the wit to wish not to constrain each other, and to follow each his own inclination. The Comtesse, although she was no longer in her first youth, still had a very lovely face. The desire for lovers had yielded to the desire for money, and play was her dominant passion. She took La Petite Marianne everywhere, and everywhere she was received with delight. In the meantime, the Marquise de Banneville slept peacefully. She was well aware of the Comtesse's reputation, which was somewhat questionable, and she would never have entrusted a real daughter with her. However, since Marianne had been brought up with virtuous feelings and sentiments, the Marquise, in order to have some diversion herself, left her on her honor, contenting herself with telling her that she was going to find herself in a very different scene from that of their Provence. That in every step she would find loving, tender, and passionate suitors, that she must not be too ready to believe them, and that if she felt her heart weaken, she should come to her mother and tell her everything, that in future she would regard her as her friend rather than her daughter, and would give her the advice which she herself would take. Marianne, whom they began to call the little Marquise, promised her mother that she would reveal to her all the impulses of her heart, and trusting to past experience, she believed she could brave all the gallantry in the court of France. This was a bold undertaking 30 years ago. She had the most magnificent clothes made. The latest fashions were tried on her. The Comtesse, who presided over all this herself, took care that her hair was dressed by Mademoiselle de Cognac. She had only a child's earrings and a few jewels. Her mother gave her all her own, which were badly made, and without incurring great expense, means were taken of making her 2 ear pendants of diamonds and 5 or 6 crisping pins to put in her hair. She needed no more for adornment. The Comtesse sent her her carriage soon after dinner and took her to the Comédie, the Opera, and to gaming houses. She was admired by everyone. Neither young girls nor young women could prevent themselves bestowing caresses on her, and even the most beautiful of them felt no jealousy of the praises given to her beauty. A certain hidden charm, whose impression they felt without realizing it, drew their hearts and made them pay sincere homage to the true worth of the little Marquise. For no one could escape her influence. Her imperious wit, even more than her beauty, caused her to make surer and more lasting conquests. At first, one was taken by the dazzling whiteness of her complexion. A rosy blush, appearing and reappearing, always took one by surprise. Her eyes were blue, and none were more lively. They sparkled from beneath 2 heavy eyelids, which made their glances more tender and languishing. The shape of her face was oval, and her scarlet and slightly protruding lips produced, as soon as she spoke seriously, 20 little depressions hollowed by the graces, and she made 20 others even more delightful when she laughed. Such a charming exterior was supported by all that a good education can add to a fine nature. The little Marquise showed a glow of modesty on her face, which commanded respect. She knew how to distinguish occasions, never went to church unless coiffed, wearing no patches and avoiding the display which the greater part of women seek. One must, she would say, pray to God at Mass and dance at a ball and do it wholeheartedly. She had spent a most agreeable life for 3 months when it was the time of Carnival. All the princes were there, all the officers had returned from the armies, and public entertainments were warming up on all sides. Everyone was giving a rout, and there was a grand ball at the Palais Royal. The Comtesse, who was not young enough to go with her face uncovered, went there masked, and made the little Marquise one of her party. She was dressed as a shepherdess, in a simple but becoming costume. Her hair, which fell down to her waist, was tied up in large curls with rose-colored ribbons, neither pearls nor diamonds, but beautiful coronets. She was then only dressed as herself. She had not been dressed by anyone save herself, and did not fail to attract the attention of all the company. Her beauty was there in its triumph. The handsome Sionade was also there, dressed in woman's attire, in order to compete with the fair sex, and to carry off, in the judgment of the connoisseurs, the prize of being the most beautiful of all. When she arrived at the ball, the Comtesse made up her mind and went to place herself behind the lovely Sionade. "Princess," she said to him, approaching him and presenting the little Marquise to him, "here is a young shepherdess who is not unworthy of a glance from you." Marianne drew near with respect and was about to kiss the hem of the prince's robe, or I should say, princess's, but he raised her up and embraced her tenderly. "What a beautiful child!" he cried in rapture. "Charming features! What a smile! What delicacy! If I am not mistaken, she has even more wit than beauty." The little Marquise had replied with no more than a modest smile when a young prince came to take her to dance. The respect which all the company owed to his high birth attracted everyone's eyes and attention at first, but then it was seen with what grace the young Marquise replied to him without the least confusion, her ear for music, her lightness of foot, her little jumps in tempo, her little delicate smiles without malice, the fresh bloom which the exertion spread on her countenance. The whole company, as if in concert, was reduced to silence. The violons had the pleasure of hearing themselves play, as everyone in the room was absorbed in looking at and admiring her. The dance ended with applause, for which the prince, well-loved though he was, had only the lesser share. The acclaim which the little Marquise had received at the assembly in the Palais Royal redoubled the Comtesse's affection and care. She could no longer do without her, and in order to enjoy her company and her leisure, she offered to give her an apartment in her house. But the mother would never consent to that. The little Marquise was nearly 14 years old, and it was essential to the secret of her birth that no one be familiarly close to her. She was still quite ignorant of her condition, and although she had many suitors, she felt nothing towards them, thinking solely of herself and her own beauty. No one spoke to her of anything else. She drank deeply of such a delicious draught and believed herself to be the most beautiful person in the world, particularly as every day her looking-glass swore to her that it did not lie. One day, when she was at the Comédie in a box in the first tier, she noticed in the next box a handsome young man wearing a scarlet juste au corps with gold and silver embroidery. But what drew her attention more was that he had dazzling diamond rings in his ears and 3 or 4 patches on his face. From curiosity, she set herself to look at him well, and finding he had such a sweet and pleasant countenance, could not contain herself. "Madame," she said to the Comtesse, "that is a handsome young man there." "That is true," said the Comtesse, "but he makes himself pretty, and that does not suit a man. Why does he not dress as a girl?" The play continued. They ceased to converse, but the little Marquise often turned her head and felt no more interest in the Faux Alcibiade, which was being shown. Some days later, when she was again at the Comédie but in the third tier, the same young man who made himself so conspicuous through his extraordinary adornment was in the second tier, and having a comfortable view of the little Marquise, who was in the third, he felt all the attraction for her that she had felt for him the first time. But he restrained himself less. He kept his back to the actors all the time and could not refrain from looking up at the little Marquise, who for her part responded to him rather more than strict modesty would have allowed. In this mutual exchange of glances, she felt what she had never before felt, a certain delicate and profound joy which went from the eyes into her heart and made all the happiness there was in life. At last, when the play was over and the audience waiting for the curtain piece, the handsome young man left his box to go and inquire the little Marquise's name. The doorkeepers, who saw her often, told it to him without persuasion, and even added her place of residence. Seeing then that she was a person of quality, he resolved to make her acquaintance if he could, even without progressing further. He decided, love is ingenious, to enter the little Marquise's box abruptly, pretending that he had made a mistake. "Ah, madame," he cried, "I crave your pardon. I thought I was going into my own box." The Marquise de Banneville liked little intrigues and did not let this one escape her. "Monsieur," she most politely replied, "we are very happy that you made a mistake, and when one is made as you are, one is well received everywhere." In that way, she wanted to detain him, to see him at her leisure, to examine him and his adornments, to please her daughter, whose emotion she had already noticed, and in a word, to enjoy herself harmlessly. He demurred a little and then remained in the box without putting himself in the front row. They put 100 questions to him, to which he replied with much wit and certain charm in his voice and in his whole manner, which made him most likable. The little Marquise asked him why he had earrings. He replied that it was from habit, that having had his ears pierced since childhood, he always wore diamond earrings, and as for the rest, at his age little adornments were forgivable, which properly became only the fair sex. "It all suits you well, monsieur," said the little Marquise, blushing. "You can wear patches and bracelets with no opposition from us. He will not be the first, for these days the young men adorn themselves like girls." The conversation never flagged. When the curtain piece was ended, he conducted the ladies to their carriages and followed them in his own to the Marquise's house. There, without attempting to enter, he sent a page to present his compliments and to say that his escort had not been necessary for them. In the following days they found him everywhere, at church, at the promenades, at public entertainments, always deferential, always respectful, bowing deeply to the little Marquise without attempting to approach or speak to her. He appeared to be concerned in only one thing, and devoted all his time to it. At last, at the end of 3 weeks, a conseiller au Parlement, the Marquise de Banneville's brother, came one morning to propose that she receive a visit from the Marquis de Perrault, his good friend and neighbor. He assured her that he was an excellent man and brought him in the afternoon. The Marquis had the most beautiful head of hair, black, with natural waves falling into thick curls. It was cut in line with the ears so as to show his diamond earrings, to each of which he had that day affixed a small pearl pendant. A mere 2 or 3 patches drew attention to his lovely skin. "Ah, brother," said the Marquise, "is this the Marquis de Perrault?" "Yes, madame," replied the Marquis. "Who cannot live much longer without seeing her who is the most beautiful in the world?" In saying these words, he turned toward the little Marquise, who was beside herself with joy. They sat down. They talked of the news, amusements, of new books. The little Marquise could sustain all kinds of conversation, and they soon became easy with each other. The old conseiller was the first to go. The Marquis remained as long as he could and was the last to leave. Thereafter, he never failed to come to pay court to the one he loved, and always prepared everything perfectly. Summer had arrived, and when they went for an excursion to Vincennes or to Bois de Boulogne, they would find at an appointed place under the cool of the trees a magnificent collation, which seemed to have brought by magic violins today, hautboys tomorrow. The Marquis seemed to have given no orders, but for all that, it was obvious that it all came from him. They were, however, some days without guessing who had sent magnificent present to the little Marquise. One morning, a carrier brought a chest to her house from, he said, the Comtesse d'Aletef. They opened it eagerly. It was with great delight they found therein gloves, scented waters, pomades, perfumed oils, gold cases, little toilet boxes, over a dozen different kinds of snuff boxes, and innumerable other treasures. The little Marquise thanked the Comtesse, who did not know what she meant. In the end she guessed, but her heart reproached her more than once for not having guessed at first. Through all these little attentions, the Marquis hastened his suit. The little Marquise was acutely sensible of this. "Madame," she said to her mother with an admirable frankness, "I no longer know where I am. Once I wanted to be beautiful in everyone's eyes, and now I only want to be so in the eyes of the Marquis. I used to like balls, plays, receptions, places where there was much life and noise, but I care for none of that now. To be alone and think of him whom I love, that is the pleasure of my life. To whisper, 'He will come soon. Perhaps he will tell me that he loves me, because, madame, although he has not yet said it to me, his lips have not yet uttered those lovely words, I love you. It is true that his eyes and deeds have told me that 100 times. My child," replied the Marquise, "I am deeply sorry for you. Before you saw the Marquis, you were happy. Everyone delighted you, everyone loved you, and you loved only yourself, your own person, your beauty. The desire to please was your whole desire, and you were pleasing. Why change such a sweet life? Believe me, my dear child, do not dream of taking advantage of the attraction which nature has given you. Be beautiful. You have known this delight. Is there any other like it? Draw all the glances to yourself and the yearnings of all hearts. Be charming wherever you may be. Hear without cease the praises from people who are not flatterers. To be loved by all, but to love only oneself, that, my daughter, is the supreme happiness, and you can enjoy it for a long time. But you must not abdicate your throne to become a slave. You must resist the first attachment which allures you in spite of yourself. You command now, but very soon you will obey. Men are deceivers. The Marquis loves you today. Tomorrow he will love another." "He could not love me more," said the little Marquise. "How could he love another?" And then she burst into tears. Her mother, who loved her tenderly, tried to comfort her, in fact, by telling her that the Marquis was important, and the love which was developing caused her distress. "What will develop from all this?" she said to herself. "What strange outcome? If the Marquis declares himself, if he summons up his courage, one could refuse him nothing. But," she replied to herself, "the little Marquise has been well brought up. She is sensible, and at the most will permit only such trifling favors which mean nothing, which will leave them both in a state of ignorance, which is absolutely essential for their happiness." They were talking to each other in this way when they were informed that the Marquis had sent them a dozen young partridges, and that he was at the door, unwilling to enter because he was returning from hunting. "But he must come in," cried the little Marquise. He must come in. We want to see him in his informal dress. He entered a moment later and gave his apologies for his powder marks, sunburn, and a disordered peruke. No, no, said the Marquise, do not deceive yourself. We would rather see you in a riding habit than wearing ear pendants. If that is so, madame, he replied, you shall see me soon as a fire raiser. He remained standing as if to take his leave, but they made him sit down, and the mother, the good mother, told them to talk together while she went to write in her private room. The femmes de chambre, who were worldly wise, went into the garde-robe, and the lovers remained on their own. They did not speak for some time. The little Marquise, still full of emotion from what she had said to her mother, hardly dared to raise her eyes, and the Marquis, even more bashful, looked at her and sighed. The silence was not lacking in tenderness. Long looks and uncontrollable sighs were a kind of speech to them, which well suited the lovers, and their shared embarrassment seemed a sign of their hinted love. The little Marquise was the first one to rouse herself. You are dreaming, Marquis, she said. It is your sport which makes you dream? Ah, beautiful Marquise, said the Marquis. Sportsmen are happy. They do not fall in love. Why do you say that, Marquis? She replied. Is loving such a great ill? Madame, it is the greatest good in the world, he answered. But when one loves on one's own, it is the greatest of all ills. I love, and I am not loved. I love the most lovable person there is. Venus herself would not presume to put herself before her. She is insensitive. She sees, she hears me, but she remains cruelly silent. With such harshness, can I doubt my fate? In saying these last words, the Marquis went on his knees before the little Marquise, who let him stay, and he kissed her beautiful hands without resistance from her. Her eyes were lowered, and heavy tears ran from them. You are weeping, beautiful Marquise, he said. You are weeping, and I am the cause. My love constrains you, and you are weeping. Ah, Marquis, she answers with a deep sigh. One weeps from joy as well as sadness, and I have never been in such delight. She said no more, and holding out her arms to her beloved Marquis, granted him those favors which she would have refused to all the kings on earth. Their caresses took the place of protestations of love. In the little Marquise's lips, the Marquis found a willingness which her eyes had hidden from him, and this conversation would have lasted longer if her mother had not come in from her room. She found each of them crying and laughing at the same time, and she wondered if there had ever been such tears to wipe away. The Marquis at once rose to make his leave, but the mother in a most friendly manner said to him, But do you not want to eat your partridges, monsieur? He needed little pressing. The thing that he wanted more than anything was to be accepted familiarly in the house. He stayed in hunting dress as he was, and had the tender delight of seeing the one he loved eat. To see, close to, rose-pink lips which opened to show gums of coral and teeth of alabaster, which opened and closed with the speed which is natural to all actions of the young, to see a lovely face in all the animation of its movements, giving a delight in their repetition, and to enjoy the same pleasure at the same time. That is what love grants only to his favored ones. After that happy day, the Marquis supped there every evening. It was a regular affair, and the little Marquise's suitors, who till then had no cause for jealousy amongst each other, took it as settled. The choice had been made, and each one admitted that beauty and vanity, however powerful they might be, were not strong enough to protect a heart against love. The Comte de something, who had been most ardent, strongly felt that he was being sneered at for his passion. He was handsome, well-built, courageous, a soldier, and could not endure the little Marquise giving her hand to the Marquis de Becourt. whom he regarded as greatly inferior to him in every way. He determined to pick a quarrel with him, and thus dishonor him, believing him too beautiful and too effeminate to dare to measure swords against him. But he was most taken aback when, at the first words he spoke to him at the gate of Tuileries, he saw the Marquise, sword in hand, thrust at him relentlessly. They fought strongly, and were separated by their friends. The adventure pleased the little Marquise greatly. It gave a warlike air to her lover, whom she had till then thought would shake at the thought of combat. She saw clearly that her beauty and her attractions would bring the Marquise similar embroilments almost every day, and one evening she said to him, "Marquis, we must put an end to all jealousy and silence the expostulators. We love each other, and we shall always love each other. We must be tied with those knots which are never broken during our lifetime." "Ah, beautiful Marquise," he said, "of what are you thinking? Are you weary of our happiness? Marriage is usually the end of delight. Let us stay as we are. As for myself, I am content with the favors you grant me, but I would not ask you for more." "But I," replied the little Marquise, "I'm not content. I feel that there is something lacking in our happiness, and that perhaps we shall find it when you are everything to me, and I everything to you." "It would not be fair," the Marquis answered, "for you to marry one who has only a younger son's fortune, who has squandered the best part of what he had, and whom you know only from his appearance, which is often deceptive." "And that is what I love," she interrupted. "I am delighted to have enough for us both, and most happy to show you that I am attracted only by your attractions." So they were, when the Marquise de Banneville interrupted them. She had just dismissed her men of affairs, and thought she would revive her spirits in the cheerfulness of the young ones. But she found them deeply serious. The Marquis had been most upset by the proposal the little Marquise had made of him. She was, according to all appearances, an excellent match for him. But he had his private reasons which opposed it, and which he believed to be insurmountable. The little Marquise, on her side, was a little piqued to have made such a great advance to no avail, but she soon recovered, and thought that the Marquis had not accepted her proposal out of respect for her, or that he wished to prove his fidelity. This thought made her determine to speak to her mother about it, which she did the next day. No one was ever more astonished than the Marquise de Banneville when her daughter talked to her of marrying. She was 16 and no longer a child. Her eyes had not been opened to her true condition, and her mother greatly hoped that they never would be. She took care not to consent to her marrying, but to unveil the truth to her would be a harsh cure both for her and for him. She determined not to do it except as a last resort, and in the meantime to bring the proposed marriage to the Marquis to naught, or at least postpone it. He was in agreement with her on this, but the little Marquise, who was strong in her desires, begged, implored, wept, and used every possible means to sway her mother, having no doubts about her lover, who had not the temerity to oppose her with the same steadfastness. In the end, she was so insistent that her mother said these words to her: "You have forced my hand, dear child, and it is against my will that I am going to reveal to you what I wished to keep hidden from you, even at the price of my life. I loved your poor father, and when I so unhappily lost him, the fear of a similar ill fate coming to you made me passionately wish to have a girl. I was not so fortunate. I gave birth to a boy, and had him brought up as a daughter. His sweetness, his loving nature, his beauty all contributed to my plan. I have a son, and everyone believes I have a daughter." "Oh, madame," cried the little Marquise, "could it be possible that I am—" "Yes, my child, her mother said, kissing her. "You are a boy. I see how greatly this affects you. Habit has given you a different nature. You are accustomed to a life far different from that which you would have led. I thought of making you happy, and I would never have revealed so melancholy a truth if your persistency over the Marquis had not obliged me to do so. See now, without me, what you are going to do, to what you are going to expose yourself, and what scandal you are going to give to the public." Instead of replying, the little Marquise merely wept, and her mother vainly said to her, "But my child, continue to live in the same way. Always be the little Marquise, loved and adorned by all who see her. Love your handsome Marquise if you wish, but do not dream of marrying him." "Alas," she cried through her tears, "he does not ask him more. He is in despair when I speak of our marrying. Could he know my secret? If I believed that, dear mother, I would go and hide myself at the end of the earth. If he knew it." On that a flood of tears. "Alas, poor little Marquise," she added, "what are you going to do? Will you now dare to show yourself and make yourself beautiful? But what have you said? What have you done? How can you give a name to those favors which you granted to the Marquis? Blush, unhappy girl, blush. Ah! Nature is blind not to have warned me of my duty. Alas! I acted in good faith, but now I understand. I must conduct myself quite differently in future. And in spite of him who I love, I must do what I should do." She was uttering these words with determination when it was announced that the Marquis was at the door of the antechamber. He entered with a happy air and was astonished to see mother and daughter with lowered eyes and in tears. The mother, without waiting for him to speak, rose and went to her private room and left him on his own. Then he took courage. "What is it, beautiful Marquise?" he said, dropping to his knees. "You have some sorrow. Cannot you share it with your friends? You do not even look at me. Is it then I who have made you shed tears? And should I be to blame without knowing it?" The little Marquise looked at him and dissolved into tears. "No, no," she cried. "No, that is impossible. And if it were true, I should not feel what I do feel. Nature is wise, and her workings have reasons." The Marquise did not know what all this meant. He was asking for an explanation when the mother, being a little restored, came from her room and went to her daughter's rescue. "You see her," she said to the Marquis. "You see her quite beside herself. It is my fault. In spite of me, she had her fortune told, and they said she would never marry the one she loved. That has upset her, Monsieur le Marquis, and you now know the reason." "As for me, madame," he replied, "that does not trouble me at all. May she remain always as she is, and for me I only ask to see her. I should be most happy if she would grant me the title of the first among her friends." The conversation did not last long. Their minds were too troubled, and some time was needed to put them back to their usual equilibrium. But it came so perfectly that in a week there was no sign of any upset. The Marquis' presence, his charm, his endearments obliterated all that her mother had told her of her condition. She believed it no more, or did not wish to believe it. Her delight took her from reflecting on it. She spent her life in the usual way with her lover, and felt her passion increase with such violence that the thought of an eternal union came to torment her again. "Yes," she said to herself, "he will not renegade, and he will never leave me." She had determined to speak of it again, and when her mother fell ill from such a grave illness that after 3 days they despaired of her recovery, she made her will and sent for her brother, the conseiller, whom she made guardian of the little Marquise. He was her uncle and her heir, because all the property came from her mother. She told him confidentially the truth of her daughter's birth, begging him to take heed of it and to let her live in her innocent happiness, which harmed no one, and which, making her unable to be married, assured a large inheritance to his children. The good conseiller learned of this news with great joy, and saw his sister die without shedding a tear. The 30,000 livres income which she left to the little Marquise seemed destined for his children, and he had only to gratify his so-called niece's obstinacy. He did it beautifully, telling her that he would be as a mother to her, and that he had no wish to be her guardian except nominally. These understanding ways gave a little comfort to the little Marquise, who was truly sorrowful, but the sight of her beloved Marquis comforted her even more. She saw herself as absolute master of her fate, and thought only of sharing it with the one she loved. 6 months of formal mourning passed, and then all pleasures came crowding back to the little Marquise. She went often to balls, to the comédie, to the opéra, and was always with the same escort. The Marquis never left her, and all the other suitors, seeing clearly that it was a settled affair, retired from the contest. They lived happily, and perhaps would not have thought of anything else if malicious tongues could have left them in peace. Everywhere it was said the little Marquise was indeed beautiful, but that since the death of her mother she had not kept within bounds, that she was seen everywhere with the Marquis, that her house was almost his, that he supped there every evening, and did not leave until midnight. Her best friends found fault with her. Anonymous letters were written to her. Her uncle was told of it, and he spoke to her. In the end, things went so far that the little Marquise took up her first notion again, and to silence everybody, she resolved to marry the Marquis. She spoke to him of it most forcibly. Even so, he resisted, and consented to the idea only on the condition that the marriage would be merely for the public eye, and that they would live together as brother and sister, there being no other means, he said, of loving each other forever. The little Marquise willingly agreed to this condition. What her mother had told her came sometimes into her mind. She spoke of her intentions to her uncle, who at first depicted to her the thorns and thistles of wedlock, and ended by giving his consent. In his heart he was delighted. Therefrom he saw an income of 30,000 livres assured to his family, but had no fear of his niece having children by the Marquis de Becourt. If she did not marry, her fantasy of being a girl would change in the course of years with her beauty, which would inevitably fade. So the marriage was arranged. Clothes were made, and the ceremony took place at the good uncle's house, who, as guardian, wanted to give the wedding feast. Never had the little Marquise appeared so beautiful as on that day. She wore a gown of black velvet covered with precious stones and diamond ear pendants. The Comtesse de la Treffe, who always loved her, escorted her to the church, where the Marquis waited in a black velvet cloak bedecked with gold lace, curled, powdered with earrings and patches, so much adorned that his best friends would not forgive him for such devotion to personal display. They were joined together forever, and everyone gave them 1,000 blessings. In the evening, the festivities were magnificent. The king's music and the violon were there. At last, the fateful hour arrived. Relatives and friends put them together in the nuptial bed and embraced them, the men laughing, and some good old aunts weeping. It was then that the little Marquise was most astonished to see her lover's coldness and indifference. He was at the other side of the bed, sighing and crying. She moved halfway to him, without his seeming to notice it. In the end, unable to bear such wretchedness any longer, "What have I done to you, Marquis?" she said. "Don't you love me any more? Say something, or you will see me die." "Alas, madame," said the Marquis to her, "what I said to you was right. We were living happily. You loved me, and you are going to hate me." I have deceived you. Come near and see." At the same time, he took her hand and placed it on the most lovely bosom. "You see," he added, dissolving into tears, "you see that I am useless to you, because I am a woman as you are." Who could describe the surprise and the joy of the little Marquise? At that moment, she had no doubts that she was a boy throwing herself into the arms of her beloved Marquis. She was the cause of the same surprise and joy to him. Peace was soon made. They wondered at their fate, which had guided them so happily, and made 1,000 protestations of eternal fidelity. "For myself," said the little Marquise, "I am so accustomed to being a girl that I want to remain a woman all my life. How could I wear a man's hat?" "As for me," said the Marquis, "I have had my sword in my hand more than once without being ill at ease, and I shall tell you my story one day. So let us remain as we are. Rejoice, beautiful Marquise, in all the charms of your sex, and I shall enjoy all the freedom of mine." The day after the wedding, they received the usual compliments, and a week later they left for the province, where they are still living in one of their chateaux. The uncle will have to go to see them, and he will be most surprised to see an infant boy born of such a marriage, and who will take from him all hope of a great inheritance. Yes! Oh my gosh. So that is the Marquise-Marquis de Banneville. Wow. Isn't that such a beautiful story? Like, oh, just turns out that they were T for T this whole time. Oh, I love it. Just, it's so beautiful. And I love that this exists. And I hate that it's so unknown. That none of us have heard of this before. So, yeah, I hope that you were able to listen to this and enjoyed it, and now more people will know it exists. Alright, I'm probably going to do a few more of these, so watch out for more Pride readings. You have a book or story you want me to read for Pride? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah!